and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at B2B World, and with me are Farrukh, Pitafi and Faisal. Today's show, we're going to be talking about a very important announcement that has cleared away a lot of uncertainty and a lot of question marks with reference to when the elections are going to be held in the country. And it seems now that this clarity has been provided by the Election Commission of Pakistan, who have announced that the elections will be held by the end of January 2024. And they've also said that the initial preliminary list of delimitations will be announced by 27th of September, which is very soon. And then also that the entire delimitation process is due to be completed by November 30th, which will of course take into account any reservations or objections that any political parties may have. And then of course after that, the 54-day time period for the election schedule, which means that we're going to be seeing elections held in the country during the last week of January 2024. And this is important, especially with reference to the number of demands that were being made, especially from parties such as the PPP and PTI and others, who talked about at least some sort of clarity and date of when the elections are going to be held, and not an indefinite time moving forward, even though of course that was something that the ECP had always talked about, that this is something that they're going to make sure happens, because the entire delimitation process needed to be completed as per the new census results which were approved. And so this is going to be an important way forward in terms of how exactly this entire process takes place. But of course it also raises question marks with reference to the delimitation process itself, how we're seeing the preliminary results about next week, and then also whether or not this is something that can actually be completed by November 30th with the possible reservations or objections that different parties may have. And then of course moving forward, what is going to be the scenario with the ECP conducting the election, and whether or not the country, including of course the political parties in the ECP and the caretaker setup, will be prepared enough to do it. So we're going to be taking a look at all of that in our first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to focus on what is happening at the UN General Assembly, with of course the caretaker Prime Minister also taking part, and on the sidelines of the summit he's also attending different summits with reference to climate change and SDGs. And this is important, especially in terms of the impact that we have seen in Pakistan just last year in the massive floods that hit the country. And of course the United Nations Secretary General and different countries around the world gave a lot of attention to the impact that was seen in terms of a climate-induced disaster within the country. And so we understand that Pakistan is one of the many developing countries that are dealing with these issues, and was at the forefront of talking about climate change justice. Again, something that was reiterated by the caretaker Prime Minister along the sidelines of the UN General Assembly session, saying that this is something that will be the demand that Pakistan will be putting forward at the COP28 in Dubai in December this year, and something that Pakistan will be talking about in terms of tangible action of the distribution of the pledges that were made, especially in terms of loss and damage and adaptation that are extremely necessary for countries like Pakistan. So we're going to focus on that at the end of the show today. Farrukh and Faisal, of course, are going to be part of the discussion with me. We've also been joined online for our first segment by Mr. Khurram SHAHZAD, who's a senior journalist, and Mr. Salahudin Safdar, spokesperson FAFEN. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the discussion. Let me start with you, Khurram Saab. A lot of course, uncertainty seems to be put at play with the ECP, of course, announcing the election schedule. This is something that was the expectation of different political parties, including the PPP, talking about clarity in terms of what sort of timeline and schedule lies ahead. Do you think that this announcement has at least put to bed the kind of reservations that we were seeing springing up, and also the potential friction that this was causing between different political parties?
Yeah, actually, this announcement, I mean, now at least we have something from Election Commission. Now we know that the elections will be taking place in January, in the last week of January. So a bit of uncertainty has gone away, but still it would have been much better if Election Commission would have come with complete schedule and would have announced the date of the elections, because some parties are still criticizing Election Commission, like PPP has rejected it, PTI has of course rejected it. So I think it is a step towards something better, but it would have been much better if Election Commission would have announced the complete schedule.
Saab, I'll take your perspective in as well. Do you think that this is something possibly that the ECP could have done now in terms of given an actual date, considering, of course, that a lot is still on the horizon, especially in terms of how the entire delimitation process is going to be completed with the possible reservations that can be raised. Do you think at this point the ECP could have announced a date?
Thank you, Sarah, for having me in this important discussion today. It is a good thing that the Election Commission has tried to clear some of the uncertainty around the election date. But as Khurram Sahab said, it would have been a lot better if Election Commission had come up with a specific election date and an election schedule as is required under the Section 57 of the Elections Act. Now, after the amendment of uh, latest amendment in the Elections Act, it is solely the responsibility of the Election Commission to announce a date for election. It does not need to consult with the president as was the case previously. So the ball solely lies in the court of Election Commission of Pakistan now. And we have been discussing, we have been saying it previously as well, that transparency and the consensus are two main things that are very important when talking about election, especially general election that will form basis of new government. So Election Commission will be well advised if it comes up with a specific election date, it announces it well before time, and it gives it justification that why it is pushing the elections beyond the 90-day time period mentioned in the constitution. Although we all know that it is because of the delimitation, but Election Commission needs to give this justification in the proper manner because as the Section 14 of the Elections Act requires Election Commission to prepare an action plan for the general election. For every general election, 4 months before the general election, Election Commission is required to make this action plan. This action plan entails the details of the actions that have been taken and that are required to be taken. So before the general now that the general elections were due by November 7, going by the 90-day time period. So 4 months before this date, Election Commission would have prepared, let's assume that Election Commission would have prepared an action plan. This action plan would have noted both the scenarios that the delimitation may be required or it may not be required. In both cases, Election Commission would have calculated a certain date. So it would have been better if Election Commission announced that date or had given its due justifications 4 months before today. Certainly, the more there is clarity on the election date, more would be.
Well, Salahudin Sahab, I'm glad that you're talking about the election date and how the procedure is going forward. But last time you were in this program, you were talking about the importance of how impartial delimitation is. So far, what has taken place, is FAFEN happy with the way a delimitation process is going forward?
And also add to that, Salahudin Sahab, what you were saying in terms of the Section 57 of the Elections Act and also the justification that needs to be there. Of course, this is something that the ECP has always stated that according to the Elections Act, they're not going to restrict themselves to the 90-day time period because delimitations are in order. Is that not something that is justification enough from the ECP? But in terms of the action plan and of course what you were saying in terms of a schedule to be released, do you think that that also applies given the current situation that first delimitations had to be carried out? Do you think irrespective of that obligation on the ECP to provide an action plan and a schedule at this moment does apply from now, or do you think it will start after the delimitation process is complete?
Regarding the delimitation process, Election Commission has so far has been doing its homework. It will come up with the proposals on 27th of September. FAFEN would be able to comment on the quality of these delimitation only after reviewing those initial preliminary proposals of the delimitations. It would largely depend on how the recent delimitations are different or how they are similar to the previous delimitation. If these are very much different from the previous delimitation conducted in 2022, then we can expect that there will be a lot more representation, a lot more objections filed by voters and parties on this delimitation. In that case,
last time you were here, your demand was that all constituencies should have equal number of voters. So has there been a change in that demand, sir?
It would be only possible when the initial proposals of delimitations are available. Then we can comment that the election commission is carving out equal sized constituencies or not. At this moment, all the procedure, all the delimitation process is being conducted confidentially to avoid any external influence. And it is a good thing that the election commission is doing it, is ensuring secrecy of the process at the moment. But after the delimitation proposals are available, then we can comment, we can see that how much these constituencies are vary in their sizes, and if the size varies more than 10%, then certainly this is problematic, and this compromises the equality of vote, because constituencies having double the population of smaller constituencies obviously mean that the voters in the larger constituencies have lesser political power than voters of the smaller constituencies.
Yeah, true. Khurram Saab, coming towards you, want to know about what would be the reaction of political parties. Of course, if we look into PMLN, we know that former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, he categorically said that now, of course, the ball is in the court of obviously Election Commission, and now we have a almost approximate time and date of the elections. And at the same time, one of the parties that was associated with PDM earlier, and of course was part of the previous government, People's Party, they have been demanding obviously within the 90 days time frame. And then there are few more political parties, of course, seek the same. Do you think that there will be sort of reaction from different political parties, and if so, what kind of reaction that would be?
Yeah, I was just speaking to Mr. Faisal Karim Kundi, who is Secretary Information for Pakistan People's Party, just a while ago, just before this program, and he was telling me that People's Party has rejected this announcement. He said we had demanded for an exact election date, and Election Commission has failed to give us a date. And he said that this is unconstitutional. And he said that we have called the Central Executive Committee meeting of the People's Party, and we will put this this announcement in that meeting, and then we will decide that how should we react to this announcement. He said that we have two options to react this. One is to go to the court and challenge this announcement, and the other one is to go to people. So he said that the one thing is clear, that we don't accept this, we reject this, because our demand was to announce an exact date and conduct elections during the 90 days period. But Election Commission has failed to do so. So this announcement is unconstitutional, and we are going to debate it, and we will consider about going to the court and are going to people. So he said that we will come with a plan to protest this. Meanwhile, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf also rejected it, and the spokesman of the party has announced that this is unconstitutional, and the PTI said that the matter is already in Supreme Court, and it was Supreme Court to decide about this, and the Election Commission's step to announce the week of election instead of announcing a date within the 90 days time period is unconstitutional, and they also said that we will take this issue up.
Right. Farrukh, when we take a look at the situation, and when we talk about the uncertainty being clear to some extent, then with the announcement that the elections would be held in the last week of January, I want to then understand, given the kind of political considerations that Mr. Khurram was also pointing towards, and the fact that there is still some aspect of when exactly the elections need to be held, whether or not we need to restrict to the 90-day time period, or that the Elections Act will be applicable, still exists. How then do you think that this will impact the way things are flowing, given the fact that that the ECP seems to be continuing based on their own stance that Elections Act, according to the Elections Act, they have time, they have to complete the delimitations process and then announce the schedule, which is what seems to be the case going forward. And if during that time there is a change in circumstance, do you think that what the possibility of that is, and secondly, how then will that impact the way that different political parties and the ECB would have to modify the entire schedule?
Right, and I want to answer that question, but before that, Sana, I just to prove that I take what you are saying very seriously, won't you actually go to Salahudin Safdar first to answer your question, which still remains unanswered? Because Faisal took it over himself.
Right, absolutely. Salahudin Safdar, that is true. The question still remains with reference to exactly what the ECP has to do in terms of the Section 57 of the Elections Act that you pointed out, and especially in terms of the action plan and giving the schedule. Given the fact that the announcement regarding the delimitations process is not yet complete, does that still apply irrespective of the fact that the delimitation process is not complete, and or the Election Commission will still have to give these things despite the situation?
Well, the law is silent about when this election schedule is to be announced. Certainly, it is to be announced at least 55 days before the election date. That is one thing that the law is clear about, that the election schedule cannot, the election process cannot begin without the announcement of the election schedule. Now, if the election schedule is to begin 54 days before the election date, so Election Commission has the liberty to announce at 55th day before the election date. But as we were discussing that in the interest of transparency, it is very important that the Election Commission is upfront about the date of election. It is more.
That means, but Salahudin Sahab, that means they are not obligated to do so right now.
Certainly, it is not legally obligated, but as is the case regarding the timelines of election is very confused, because the constitution requires elections to be held within 90 days, but the elections are not going to be held within 90 days. So when are elections to be held? Because election date is very sensitive subject. Pushing election date away or further away or bringing it closer affects the political parties' chances to win or lose an election. So it is very important that it is politically important, it is morally important that the Election Commission is upfront with the announcement of this election date. Although legally it is not obligated to announce the election date or give an election schedule well before the time. There is the law is silent about this, and we certainly would be putting it in our recommendations once we compile these recommendations for the next parliament, that the election law should specify that when this election schedule is to be announced. There is no specific clause in the Election Act that binds the Election Commission to announce it 3 months before the election, or 4 months before the election, or 2 months before the election. It is the prerogative election. It can announce it on the last moment before the initiation of the election process.
Absolutely. Yes, Farrukh.
Right, Sarad, thank you very much for actually taking me up on that. From my vantage point, there are 4 components to your question. The first one is, of course, the 90-day period. The second one is ECP. The third one is how elections are announced and what is the fallout. And the fourth one is political parties, how they are perceiving it. First of all, regarding 90-day period, I think that now, because there has been a change in Supreme Court, there are people whom I implicitly trust, and I think that if they want to, this matter can be taken up there. But my concern is that on ground, what we don't realize, we have already passed the time when the 90-day period could have been actually upheld, because there has to be a date when you have to announce it. After that, of course, there starts preparation, and we have passed that date, right? My biggest problem is the way, and I marvel at it, the way our constitution is framed, there doesn't seem to be any exemption to the whole idea of 90 days. And that worries me, Sana, because there are 2 or 3 aspects that we saw in Punjab's case. In Punjab's case, there were 2 concerns that were actually flagged. A war and terror, a law and order situation, and the second one, money is needed for that kind of operation. Now, tell me, this country actually came out of lockdowns of COVID only a couple of years ago, and at that time had, God forbid, were there to be an outbreak of some kind on the election day, the constitution is silent. Why is it that there is no provision regarding human element and the state's capacity to hold the elections, right? And then to keep the system honest by ensuring that if there is a delay, it should not be indefinite in nature. Because in the past we have seen General Zia's promise of elections in 3 months, which actually stretched to 7 years. Sana. So that is also there in this country. And yet my constitution keeps on struggling. So actually, first of all, hats off to the framers of the constitution, amenders of the constitution, and the lawmakers who are very proudly actually talking about the constitution, despite having royally dropped the ball, right? Now, for me, academically, 90 days is important. And I'm a believer in constitution, but the problem is that when you talk about grassroots realities, at least I'm going to get a date of elections. So my concern was that the delays should not be indefinite, and now we at least know that there's a ballpark that is the last week of January of the next year. There is going to be an election. I wish, like other participants, the election date would have been announced. It hasn't been.
Okay.
Now, the Election Commission, I think that there are many questions. Yes, sir? What?
May I add something here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think one plausible explanation that I have for on behalf of the Election Commission that why it has not announced a certain date. I think the Election Commission is trying to further bring the election day closer to the 90-day time period. Because if there are less number of representation, number of objections filed on the initial proposal of delimitation, then Election Commission would be able to hear those representations and decide upon them earlier than the 30-day time period that it has under the law. If it can decide the representation in 10 days, then it will be able to bring the election date a little more closer to the 90-day time period. So I think the Election Commission is still...
What difference does it make if it's closer to the 90-day time period and is not the 90-day time period?
Let's see.
Yeah, this is amazing. When you listen to any television pundit, everybody is only talking about 90 days, right? And amazingly, the country which is awfully bad at maths, this is the number that has stuck in their minds. But to me, it reminds me of Pani Vich Mandani, that is merely churning water, where you cannot gain anything. So I'm going to wrap up my intervention within a minute. Regarding Election Commission, I think that it is important that media and the judiciary and the politicians actually keep the Election Commission honest and on time. That is important. But still, it still has to give us many things which are not explained. For example, delimitation, principles, and then, of course, a schedule. The moment we get it, we'll be happier. Regarding the time frame, I've already told you that I'm at least, having a heart that at least there is some kind of ballpark that is visible. And finally, political parties. I think political parties are the ones which are going to gain the most out of any delay in elections, because none of the political parties is in shape to get elections done in time. But then, of course, theatrics matter, and they'll keep on doing what they do. But it doesn't mean much.
Right. And Faisal, I want to talk a little bit more about that with you also, especially in terms of what the parties are then going to be planning ahead, because it seems, of course, that there is at least some sort of time frame now in people's minds. But that's not good enough, especially in terms of the preparations that political parties will have to do in the upcoming elections. There will be, of course, still a lot of confusions or reservations possibly being raised, already being raised with reference to the constitution, of course, the time frame, and then, of course, the reservations around delimitations are also going to come up. And I want to understand that amid all of this, then, how will this time frame be respected, and how exactly will political parties be preparing for their election campaigns and manifestos while they're still trying to decide if they are actually contesting for elections in January?
Yeah, Sana, if we look at this scenario, of course, party by party, I'll let you know about it. Of course, if we talk about PTI as a party, of course, Farrukh is 100% right that they are not, ready to get into election as soon as possible. Being obviously their leadership being in the presence right now, and there are cases against them. And of course, first of all, they want to obviously, resolve them cases, and that's when they'll be able to get into election. And of course, in a full swing, I'm talking about, because that is what they're expecting. And of course, if we look at this extended date, they are very happy about it, but I don't know why they want to go to courts regarding it, and they want to obviously bring in a date that is within the 90-day time frame, because they should be happy about it, because things are quite uncertain for them right now, and they should be first looking for, of course, a date for their leadership to get out of the jails. Number one. And number two, if we talk about PMLN, of course, they are waiting for their leadership to come to Pakistan earlier. At least one of the leaders, I'm talking about Mohtarama Maryam Nawaz, she was here, but of course now she's gone back to England as well. If we talk about former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, he's gone back to England once more. And then the Premier leader.
Why not hold the elections in London then?
Yeah, I should do. Yeah. But of course, if we talk about PMLN, their whole leadership is gone back. It means that even they are not bothered about the earliest dates of the elections, and they want to, of course, give it a bit of time so that when things are quite normal and good for them, they can jump into election. And if we talk about People's Party, they have been portraying as if obviously within the house, there is a divide between father and the son. Of course, we saw that Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, he holds obviously that he should be going for election within 90 days time frame. And if we talk about former President Zardari. I'm sorry to interrupt,
Faisal, but I'll continue with that thought. We have to go to a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the debate, where we're talking about the announcement by the ACP regarding elections to be held in the last week of January 2024. And Faisal, you were just describing to us the way different political parties are prepared or not for the elections, and you were on PPP, and you were of the view that there is some sort of a rift between father and son. Farrukh disagrees.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually magnify one fact. This habit of ours to both-sidism, right? We have to actually go for both-sidism. If that one is rotten or problematic, the other side must also be. So we have to balance that. And amazingly, People's Party is on the receiving end whenever we are being so judicious and equitable that we find faults with People's Party also, while other parties already have faults. People's Party doesn't seem to have that many.
Right.
Yes, Sana, why I'm highlighting again and again the People's Party, because we very well know whatever they have done in the last 15 to 16 months during the government. Of course, they were the ones who gave the idea of getting into government, and PDM's government should be obviously replacing the previous government. And then later on, what they've done is that they did not take the constitutional. They only took the constitutional positions, and they did not take the political positions within the government. And why didn't they do it? Because they just did not want any of the burden, the negative burden on them, so that
Thank
they can
You're
go
proving my point.
Yeah.
Right. Let us also go to Khurram Sahib and get his opinion also. Khurram Sahib, I want to understand then, given the way you've talked about different political parties' reactions, including the PPP earlier, and given the time frame that we're looking at the moment at least, and the way that different political parties' current scenario is, how then do you think that this entire time period will then play out, especially in terms of the way the different political parties will be able to shape their narratives, will be prepared enough for the elections, and whether or not you think that possible serious obligations can be raised on the delimitations process, as perhaps is already being hinted at by certain parties?
I think at some stage these parties will have to accept whatever date is offered by the Election Commission. They are criticizing it at this moment because it is a political thing. Yes, we know that PTI is being sidelined, and it is understood that their basic demand was election as soon as possible. So, I mean, we knew that they would criticize it and they would protest it, which is understandable. But a protest by Pakistan People's Party is more as a political thing. They want to play towards the galleries to gain more support and to present themselves as an opposition party. But when the case will go to the Supreme Court, yes, of course, the 90 days have already been passed, and now all institutions will have to provide a solution. So Supreme Court will definitely go towards a solution, and they will offer a solution with the consultation of Election Commission, and a mutual date will be agreed. So I think these parties who are protesting right now will have no other option but to accept the date, whatever is decided, and if the good faith prevails, then Supreme Court will decide a date at an earlier stage. But even if they don't do it, if they go by the Election Commission's version and their side of the story, there will be a date. We know now we know that it will be in the last week of January. So these parties will have to go for elections and will have to contest the elections. And
I have a quick question from Salahudin Sahab also. Salahudin Sahab, I just want you to explain to us whether you think that the date of preliminary list to be announced of the delimitations, 27th of September, do you think that this process is too soon? Do you think that potentially this is being fast-tracked and has a possibility of compromising on quality? Secondly, the schedule of the last week of January that has been given by the ECP, is that subject to change by the ECP itself as well, and possibly they can just move it ahead and are not bound to execute it by this timeline?
The election, the delimitation process that has been conducted so far has been squeezed a little bit, but I don't think so that this squeezing of the timeline would have any impact on the quality of delimitation, because this is very mechanical process, carving out the constituencies, deciding their geographical boundaries. It is a very mechanical process, and it only requires a certain acumen and does not require a lot of time. Rather, it requires a lot of.
Regarding the timeline, does the ECP have to follow strictly January last week now that they've said it, or not? Yes or no?
I couldn't hear you properly. Can you repeat your question, please?
Does the ECP have to follow the schedule given of the last week of January, or is that subject to change without any legal consequences?
No, I don't think that this announcement of last week of January have any legal basis. Any election date announced by the Election Commission can also be changed, because Elections Act gives power to the election.
We're short on time. Thank you very much, Salahudin Safdar for joining us, and thank you very much, Khurram SHAHZAD, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Of course, a certain sort of time frame has been given, but there still is a lot of uncertainty and many questions that remain to be answered. We're now going to be talking about the caretaker Prime Minister's visit to the UN General Assembly, and of course his discussions on climate change and climate justice. But before we start discussing that, here's a short package.
At COP28, scheduled in Dubai this December, with Prime Minister Anwarul Haque Kakar leading the charge for climate justice. Attending two major summits in New York on the sidelines of 78th UNGA conference, which began on 19 September, Prime Minister Anwarul Haque Kakar highlighted Pakistan's grievances on climate injustice. Pakistan has not been spared from the global climate crisis. The country has endured a series of climate-related disasters, including devastating floods displacing millions, prolonged droughts severely impacting agriculture, and record-breaking temperatures making cities uninhabitable. The 2022 floods alone affected at least 33 million people and killed at least 1,739 from the beginning of monsoon season in mid-June 2022 to November 18, 2022. 20.6 million people required humanitarian assistance. These casualties highlight the dire need for climate mitigation and adaptation measures. At COP28, the Prime Minister aims to amplify Pakistan's climate concerns on the global stage. Pakistan's key agenda includes advocating for equitable access to climate finance and technology transfer, strengthening global commitments to emission reductions, and addressing the urgent need for adaptation and resilience building in vulnerable regions. Pakistan climate casualties demand urgent action, and the COP28 presents a crucial opportunity to rally international support for equitable solutions.
Right, Faisal, well, we know, of course, that the Prime Minister is representing our stance at the UN General Assembly and the summits along the sidelines of that. And climate change justice is something extremely important to Pakistan, and we led this at the forefront, especially in the aftermath of last year's floods. But still, there seems to be a lot remaining in terms of actual tangible outcome, in terms of bringing forth the kind of financial steps that needed to be taken, especially in terms of distribution, collection of the pledges, and the way that international financial institutions will work. Do you think that possibly COP28 will allow us the space to perhaps move closer to the actual reality of these pledges and commitments?
Sana, definitely it will, and I think right now, of course, every speech, if we see of the Prime Minister, the interim Prime Minister, of course, he is highlighting the importance of the climate justice and why it is needed for Pakistan to get it, because of course, time and again we have highlighted in front of the world that we are worst hit. I mean, though we are one of the countries having very low 0.01 carbon emissions, and the duties which are bound to be delivered to Pakistan from the world side, they are not being done. And time and again we have highlighted, we know the previous Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto, he's been going across the globe and highlighting the fact, but of course the help which was required, it wasn't given at that time. But this time around, I am hopeful that the coming summit, of course, it would be the conference, it would be quite fruitful for Pakistan.
Right, and Farrukh, the situation, especially in terms of where we stand today, we really need to work towards developing more capability in our responses towards climate-induced disasters. And of course, we talked about the climate change justice in this regard because of our very minimal contribution and huge impact. But I want to know whether or not since last year, how we have identified and brought this forward on various platforms, that this is where we are coming from, this is what our stance is, and is that of many other developing countries as well. Have we come any closer to actually enabling a framework or a direction or a way forward in which the international community and international financial institutions can then act in ways that help us?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. Before that, I just wanted to clarify that when Faisal was talking about the tragedies that befell this country, I ended up smiling, but that wasn't because of what he was talking about. Something very interesting is going on the screen. When you look at it, I seem to be shrinking, and perhaps they're trying to save my head from whatever that is going on the screen, that board. So it seems that I keep on shrinking, right? So I just looked at it and smiled. But regarding, what you actually said, the biggest problem so far is that the floods have taken place in a time when we were in a political transition, right? Yeah. There was a government, but it was outgoing government. It had great ministers and a prime minister also who kept on advocating for Pakistan's rights, but then they had to go. They couldn't actually come up with an extensive plan at mitigation. remember that when we went to Geneva, we took along a plan that we actually presented to all the donors. But because there have been so many ups and downs, especially given IMF and our economic situation, in that situation we haven't been able to benefit from the generosity of the West or the donors. And then on the other side, of course, because we did not have the kind of mitigation plans domestically, we haven't been able to do much here either. So I hope that when we go to COP28, once again we are in transition. This time a caretaker prime minister is going to go there, right? But even then, I hope we keep on focusing on mitigation. I still believe that all those pledges that were made will come to Pakistan, and they will help us and improve our quality of life, particularly regarding climatic mitigation and some kind of remedies. But unfortunately, because we are so polarized, we are not focused on things that matter. I hope in coming days we actually regain this focus, and whosoever succeeds this government after their elections, they take this matter very seriously. Meanwhile, internationally also, we have seen that there have been more crises. For example, there has been Libya's crisis, where you saw how many thousands of people actually died. So we have to actually keep the perspective, but we can then actually get together with other people, other nations, and keep on advocating the cause of climatic mitigation.
Right.
And instead of justice, I am more for collective security.
Right, absolutely. And like it was said before by the UNSG as well, this is a global and collective challenge, and it needs a collective response. And we're hoping that Pakistan will be able to put forward that stance and make it clearer at COP28. And we're hoping that the stakeholders involved will be able to agree and move forward in the right direction. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for being part of the debate. We'll be coming back with more news and more discussions, but on tomorrow, and we'll, of course, be back. And I thought it was the weekend already, but it's not. But thank you very much, and we'll see you now tomorrow.